Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of the MMA Freakcast. This is our 12th episode. I am Edson Valenzuela.
I am Matthew Salzer.
My Twitter handle is at Edson_V.
And my Twitter handle is what's it called?
What's it called?
It's
Hurry up!
At Matthew Salzer.
Joking. And the website's Twitter handle is at MMA Freakout, all one word, obviously. And welcome, everyone, to this week's. It's been a week now since we've seen you all. Last week we caught an early one on Monday and skipped the week before then.
Yeah, so it's been a little bit longer than that. Oh, of note, we are now on News Hub.
Yes, so if you're going to catch articles on either MMAFreak.com or on News Hub, you'll be able to see anything that we have written up for you regarding MMA right on either site. Matt is going to catch us up, or rather fill us in, on some of his Hall of Fame choices for the MMAFreak.com Hall of Fame. We have this sort of yearly feature. Matt's been spearheading it for at least, 3 years now, Matt?
This is the third year, yeah.
So he's going to present some of these inductees throughout the show. I don't know how you want it to
we could do it that way.
Yeah. So get started and keep me up on whenever you want to start on this week's news.
Okay, so
I'm here. I'm listening.
So the Hall of Fame was formed 2 years ago by So I came on MMA Freak in about mid-2013, about August, and about that time I was noticing that the UFC Hall of Fame was not exact. It's biased, let's all be honest.
Yes.
It's a biased Hall of Fame. It's all based on who's in Dana White's good graces at the time of their induction, which right now, all those people who are in there have been on good terms with Dana White at the time.
The UFC's Hall of Fame would not be indicative, I think, to most of what say an MMA Hall of Fame would be, which is sort of all-inclusive of stars across all of mixed martial arts and maybe even martial arts. The UFC does tend to induct or acknowledge those who are sort of who have been most beneficial to the company, not necessarily to the sport.
Correct. So, and it was up on that, and also on certain other ideas that I proposed to one of our founders, Gabriel Keith, that we would
sort of make our own Hall of Fame, right?
Yes, to make our own Hall of Fame, and that was actually piggybacking on. What at the time I was calling the end of year awards, because there was at the time someone else was already doing the MMA Freak Awards. Okay. They have since become part of the MMA Awards. They're one of 10 categories. Okay. So then the rest of which are basically going to be the best of 2015 lists, and those will be done after the new year. But this is the first category.
All righty.
So the Hall of Fame
2015.
Yes, Hall of Fame 2015. But a little bit of a review. So as I said, the first class was the class of 2013. I'm just going to go over those before I go over the new ones. The first thing I'm going to do is for 2015 is I'm going to go over the honorable mentions list is what I'm going to go over, and that's people who were inducted. But so
what do you say? We do the review, we do the honorable mentions, we do news, and then afterwards we do the inductees.
Yeah, that's what I was planning.
Nice.
So class of 2013. This was the original class. It was Chuck Liddell. Oh yeah, and I should note that I should also note how the format is done before I talk about anything else. So it was based on the fact that I do top 10 lists.
Yes,
we did this in the format of a top 10 list. So that was the original intent, but because of in light of recent events and suggestions and input, mainly because of this guy right here, this will be the last year that the Hall of Fame inductees. The class will consist of 10 inductees, because we're going to run out of fighters at some point. So after this year, it's going to go down to 5 inductees per class. But that's just how that's just telling you on the format change there.
Yeah.
So Okay, so the original Hall of Fame class, class of 2013. So this was in order of votes in order to get in. It was at number. That's how I did the list. At number 10, it was Randy Couture. Number 9, it was Dana White. Number 8, Horion Gracie. Number 7, Big John McCarthy.
Big John.
Number 6, George St. Pierre. Number 5, Tito Ortiz. Number 4, Hoist Gracie. Number 3, Anderson Silva. Number 2, Ken Shamrock. And number 1, Chuck Liddell. Right. So anything you want to say about that original class?
Let's see. My only thing of note would have been myself, had I been a member of MMA Freak then. Just sort of, and I think this is part of what I mentioned to you when I did talk about maybe minimum or lowering the number of inductees. I would have probably foregone any active fighters at the time.
Well, that was the idea when I first created, was that they were going to be 4 mainly inactive fighters.
Yeah.
But it
didn't work out that way.
But yeah, the way it is that the people that make the votes for the Hall of Fame are the writers.
Yeah.
Not all the writers felt that
it should be inactive fighters only.
Yeah, they felt that it should be based on contribution. That's why active fighters at the time, like George St. Pierre, Anderson Silva, and the like, were inducted.
And to be fair, I think time has sort of helped out the list in a sense, in that George St. Pierre really hasn't been active. So I mean, it's just it is completely and totally appropriate for him to be included in any Hall of Fame for mixed martial arts, as well as Tito Ortiz has seen limited amount of activity. Of course, he does like to occasionally cash a check from time to time, but for the most part, Tito Ortiz is sort of part of a bygone era.
He was inactive at the time. He wasn't in Bellator.
Yeah. So, but no, overall, I mean, yes, absolutely great list. I think I would have put Horion Gracie a little bit further up, just because of the sort of contributions to the UFC and mixed martial arts.
Yeah,
especially in the early years.
Yeah, because if it hadn't been for Hoist Gracie, or Horion Gracie and his desire to prove the Gracie fighting style, there would not have been a UFC, because that was the whole point. And he stuck Hoist in there specifically to prove that not only can it be a better fighting style, but it could be a better fighting style against bigger, stronger fighters with a smaller guy with the right
technique.
Yes, with the right technique.
So that was 2013. Why don't you break down 2014 first?
Okay, so the class of 2014, in that same order, it was Ronda Rousey, Jens Pulver, Art Davie, Frank Shamrock, Mark Coleman, Dan Severn, BJ Penn, Matt Hughes, Fedor Emelianenko, and Vendele Silva.
Okay.
Any comments on that list?
A solid list. I really do admire the inclusion of Jens Pulver. I think not a lot of people know that Little Evil Jens Pulver is the UFC's first ever lightweight champion.
Yes, he was.
He sort of spoiled BJ Penn's party, in that BJ Penn was the hyped up fighter at the time, who I think had come off of a lot of very quick or explosive victories. And Jens Pulver as well had the knockouts, I think, on his record. But most people, I think, went into that fight, which was, I don't know, 97 or something like that.
Yeah, late 90s.
Yeah, thinking that BJ would win, then that sort of his technique would rise to the forefront, him being sort of the well-rounded Brazilian jiu-jitsu kid at the time, and Jens Pulver definitely spoiled his party and outpointed him and sort of just beat him to the punch the entire evening.
Yeah. So,
Rousey's definitely another, and that would be just another case of what I mentioned earlier, and she'll inevitably end up on a Hall of Fame list at some point.
Yeah, she'll be in the UFC Hall of Fame when she chooses to try, definitely.
I see Art Davie.
Yes,
Art Davie. 1 second here.
Another founder of the UFC.
Got it. Understood.
So that
sounds like a good idea to include him in the Hall of Fame.
Yes. So that was Yeah, and there's definitely some legends on this list.
Absolutely, Matt Hughes. I mean, Matt Hughes, sort of a Militich camp icon, welterweight dynasty during the early mid 2000s. Sort of the original dominant force in the welterweight division before GSP sort of emerged as the new king. Had some sort of legendary fights with BJ Penn. Some of my favorite fights in mixed martial arts history against BJ Penn. Yep. That's one of my favorite rivalries, I think, in the history of mixed martial arts is BJ Penn versus Matt Hughes. He was a well-rounded dude to an extent. I guess it was this. Matt Hughes had this wild combination of submission grappling and wrestling and raw wrestling, and that was cool to see. It was cool to see a Southern country boy be able to pull off a Kimura, be able to pull off a clean armbar, etc. He was fun to watch. I think I at the time I didn't like him. At the time I wanted somebody to beat him. I thought he was a little bit full of himself. He came across as a little I don't know. There's some about him.
He's a straightforward guy, but I don't think that necessarily makes him a bad guy.
Of course not.
In my opinion.
No, of course not. And it was always in fun where it was like, oh, I can't wait to see this dude lose or something like that. It was always just for fun as a fan, And Fedor, of course, a legend. Vanderlei Silva, a legend. Vanderlei Silva was one of those few Pride FC dudes who also had a history in the UFC, but he was one of those few Pride FC dudes that some of the mainstream audience in the U.S. even knew who he was at the time, which, pardon me, some of the mainstream audiences in the U.S. knew at the time who he was, even though Pride FC was sort of a more obscure fight organization. So his fights definitely created a buzz at the time. Those were some sort of fast-paced, extremely offensive fights. The ones against Rampage Jackson. His destruction of several Japanese fighters, really. Several Japanese fighters.
He in Japan, he actually earned the nickname of the Japan Killer.
Yes.
Because he
murdered people in Japan.
He's literally, not just that, he's literally undefeated against Japanese fighters. It was you know how there was kind of, you know how there was this perception of, when you find a great white hope?
Okay, yeah.
It was kind of that same thing in Japan. We need to find the great Japanese
hero.
Hope
The hero.
To topple Vanderlei, but they couldn't find him, and ultimately, Vanderlei retired under those very slippery circumstances related to the
PED stuff.
Yeah. But yeah, there was definitely a legend there.
Oh, most definitely, and I think also what a lot of people might not remember nowadays about Vanderlei Silva is that him and Chuck Liddell were sort of the very first fantasy bout, one of the very first fantasy fights, one of the very first anticipated sort of super fights in mixed martial arts, by nature of the fact that Vanderlei Silva was tearing it up over at Pride FC in what was called their middleweight division, what would be considered their light heavyweight division over here. He was over there knocking fighter after fighter out. Whatever competition he was facing was fine. People didn't mind that because they saw that he was knocking people out. Over here, Chuck Liddell found success where he went on a 4 or 5 fight winning streak as a champion.
Yes.
People thought now is the perfect time and place to do a co-promotion bout between these two dudes. They're in the right division.
There were actually talks at one point, but it fell through.
Matt. They even brought Vanderlei Silva up onto the octagon, right?
Yes, with his Pride belt.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were actually
wearing the T-shirt and everything.
Yes, they were talking about it, but it fell through. Yeah, that was probably the only time that the UFC was ever thinking about doing co-promotion. But actually, that was actually part of a larger thing, because you remember Liddell actually went to Pride.
Yes. He was. I did not know that was sort of with the permission of the UFC until after.
Yeah, that was actually he was sent to specifically represent the UFC at the time.
Understood.
So he was.
And it was botched to a certain degree because what some people might not remember, though, was hyped up when Rampage made his debut in the UFC was Chuck Liddell suffered a a serious loss, a sort of a notable loss in his a notable blemish in his earlier career, in his successful championship career, against Rampage Jackson, a guy who in Japan had made a name for himself to an extent, but was relatively unknown in the mixed martial arts world at the time.
Yeah, in the U.S.
Yes.
Yeah, and then he comes over and
does it again.
And specifically he got a tune-up against Marvin Eastman.
And that was a fun fight to watch, and I thought a perfect the UFC handled Rampages. And I don't give you the UFC credit, I think, sometimes for how they handle sort of bringing in new talent. I thought that they handled Rampage's transition into UFC sort of championship hood, let's say, perfectly, in that they matched them up right away against a competitor who was also a new sign. I think Marvin Eastman at the time was he had already been signed to the UFC prior, but I think they had signed him up again for a sort of a new run, and who had defeated Rampage Jackson in Rampage Jackson's MMA debut.
Yeah,
so it was
at least earlier career.
Early in his career, yes. So it was almost an opportunity for Rampage to redeem himself against a competitor that had prior win against him.
Yes.
And did so in impressive fashion,
Yeah, and then that set up for the grudge match where it was Rampage versus Liddell. Liddell was looking to get that redemption, and at the same time defend his title for what would have been at the time a record-breaking 5th time, and lost.
Yes, he did. In resounding fashion. I believe it was a left hook to a lunging left hook to his chin.
Yeah.
That dropped him. He's still sort of lucid. He wasn't limp or anything like that.
But
he was dazed.
But then Rampage followed it up
immediately, like a pro.
Yeah, and then at that point,
that was it.
And then at that point, Big John stepped in and was like, "It's done, it's done." And I remember Liddell was on the floor like, "Wait a minute!
How did that just happen?" It was cool. I mean, it was cool in that. Not everybody, and we're off on a tangent now. We're no longer talking Hall of Fame stuff, but it's fine because this is a great discussion that we've sort of that stems from what you
Hall
mentioned.
Of Fame
yeah,
related.
it is most definitely. It was awesome in that the first fight in Pride, it was a hard fought win between two tough dudes. But Rampage had to grind that one out just a little bit more. He did a little bit of wrestling. He was able to get Liddell onto the mat, and he was able to sort of grind out a ground and pound win where eventually Liddell just looked so gassed that it was like they threw in the towel, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think so.
The second fight was a finish, but it was in much more lightning, sort of dynamic.
Yeah, and that was at a time when the second fight was at a time when Rampage was developing his striking game more. He'd made a name for himself in Pride. It's more of a wrestler, and he was just starting to work on his stand-up game at the time. But then he changed camps when he moved from Pride to of note
Juani Barra.
Yeah, Wanabara, which eventually that camp ended up just not existing. Yeah. That camp ended up imploding. It was him. The three guys in that camp were him, Michael Bisping, and Chet Congo.
Okay.
I think that's also why him and Michael Bisping will never fight each other because they still have a close relationship. They were. That
was the Wolf House, or something. Am I remembering correctly?
That's Bisping's old.
Got it.
Wolf Slayer.
There you go.
He did. When they left, they briefly went to Wolf Slayer.
Okay.
But they were Wani
Barra's boxing students.
Yes, they were his students, and so he was working on his striking at the time, and that's how he became. That's one of the reasons why he did so well against Liddell the second time, is because he went in there and fought with superior striking.
Yeah.
And that's also why he went on a tear, even though he lost the title to Forrest Griffin. He just went on this tear, and then he was taking out guys like Keith Jardine, and he knocked out Vendele in the rubber mat. No, that wasn't a rubber match. He lost.
No, that
It was their third fight, but it couldn't be considered a rubber match because Vanderlei already had 2 of the wins.
So it was just their third fight.
Yeah, it was their third fight, and he
won that one, yes, in even a more violent fashion, I think.
And he still, to a degree, prefers striking nowadays more because he was a good wrestler, but he just went on the JC level, whereas other fighters who prefer more and
he had a solid wrestling base, but I think it was evident early in his career that what made him stand out was not necessarily technique, but raw power.
Yes, especially with that. With the rampage slam of Ricardo Arona. Triangle choke.
Incredible.
I watched that fight live, and I just saw that happen. It's like, oh my gosh, because I was in Japan.
That's like a real power bomb.
Yeah, that's literally a real power bomb. Or I've since called it the rampage slam.
Yeah, no, yes.
Because in MMA, whenever I think of that, it's just like, rampage slam, boom!
My goodness. Yeah, that was, if you have not seen this, just simply look up Rampage Jackson Slam or Rampage Jackson Arona, and it'll come up, and it's quite the knockout.
Yeah, when Sarah Kaufman pulled something similar to that against what's her name? Roxanne Modafferi, I just thought, Rampage Slam.
I've seen that before.
Yeah, she just you were talking about how there was problems with getting actual knockouts in MMA with women's MMA. That was one of them.
That was one of the good ones.
Yeah, and Roxanne did not learn from that because in her fight in the Ultimate Fighter, she goes against Jessica Rakoczy. Rakoczy does the same thing. Except it didn't knock Roxanne out. She was just rocked. And Rakoczy just finished it, followed it up, and it's just like, how do you not learn from that the first time?
Goodness.
Forrest Griffin learned from that, and I don't know if you noticed that, but in the Rampage's fight with Forrest Griffin, also, who was he's not in this list, but he learned from that, and there was a point where he actually started to get Rampage in a triangle choke because Rampage still had the fight, the wrestling game, takes him down, is about to pick him up. But
he sort of sandbags and lets go. Is that how I remember it?
Yeah, and he just flopped on his back. Yeah,
not going for that, right?
Yeah. He realized, it's like, I better let go, or I'm gonna get
maybe knocked on my back and on my head.
Yeah, or else I'm gonna get knocked out like
Arona did.
Yeah, Arona did. And so he sandbagged. He just let go and went. And he went on to win the fight.
No, that was I think Forrest Griffin's career performance.
Yeah, that was a career highlight.
That was incredible.
Was when he
out of nowhere.
Yeah,
I mean, Griffin was always a guy who was physically sort of like a specimen in a sense. I felt.
Yeah,
like
physically,
he was a big dude.
Yeah, but skill wise,
he never really manifested anything incredible. Never anything really. I thought that was
he was the ultimate underdog of the Ultimate Fighter. He was the original. He was the ultimate underdog, and he proved this multiple times over by beating Shogun in his debut.
Yes,
and stuff like that. So it was he was he would go. He proved that he could pull off stuff, but
wasn't ever able to. I mean that. And right now what we're doing is we're going off on a tangent about 205 again. But again, in that fight with Rashad, it was such a surprise because I didn't see that.
I kind of saw that because Rashad just had an overall better game to me.
It wasn't until then that I realized that, but I figured this guy's the taller dude. He's got the reach. The way that he fought Rampage, I thought all he has to do is repeat that against Rashad and he'll be okay.
Well, remember, like I said, Rampage, the highest level of wrestling he got was at the JC level.
Oh, I see.
Rashad was a D1 college wrestler.
Okay. Yeah.
So he didn't get All-American status, but he got a scholarship. He was recruited by Michigan State.
Yes.
He went out there and
performed at a higher level than Rampage did, at least.
Yeah. So that helped him in his transition to MMA. That still helps him to a degree in his fights.
Of course.
So, especially before his injury, he went out and outdid Sonnen. Sonnen was an Olympic alternate. You could almost argue that Sonnen should have the better wrestling, but he got outclassed by Rashad.
Yeah.
And he got finished with Rashad with the hooks and go to the side of his head.
Honorable mentions. You should maybe.
Okay, yeah. Okay. So yeah, we've gotten a little off topic. So yeah, so the honorable mentions, and then we'll finally get to the news. So so we went over that. So the honorable mentions for the Hall of Fame class of 2015, and these guys are all eligible for next year.
Okay.
The first guy I'm going to mention, and that our own Tom Heffernan voted, is Ariel Helwani.
All right.
Who,
Honorable mention, and
yeah.
shout out to Heffy at Heffy Jr.
Yeah, and I should note that that Mr. Helwani, I actually met him at the Invicta is going to be coming to Southern California in January. I actually met him at an Invicta event in February. This last February in LA.
Okay.
And he's a nice guy.
Yes, he seems like he would be an excellent.
Yeah, he's a very nice guy, and and he said I can't believe he said this to me. He said it's an honor to meet you.
Yes, he did.
And so but I think to me that just shows that, because I talked to him about how I'm an amateur MMA.
Yeah, you have a passion for the sport.
I'm an amateur MMA reporter, and he's the definition to me of a reporter.
Definitely. One of the most successful in the field. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. He's gotten as far as I think any of us could. He's up.
Yeah.
He's on Fox Sports 1, and he's on national television.
The dude's big time.
Yeah, the dude. Yeah, he's big time. So I'm sure that he'll get in. He'll get in at some point.
Absolutely.
Well, next year, the year after, someone's gonna get voted. Someone's gonna vote him in.
Yeah, definitely.
I might vote him in, and he'll get in at some point.
Of course.
And so then the next honorable mention, which is the only guy you'd voted for, and that did not get in, is David the Tank Abbott.
Definitely. If I could mention something, it's just neat. He was the guy that was involved in the sport early on and whatnot, and he's a Southern California dude. He's the original Huntington Beach bad boy. Not a lot of people know the original Huntington Beach bad boy. Not Tito Ortiz. The original Huntington Beach bad boy is Tank Abbott.
Also of note, contrary to his rather plump appearance, he's also one of the original cross-trained athletes. He was one of the guys who originally came in with a boxing background, and he came in with a wrestling background.
Yeah,
he was one of the original cross-trained athletes. At a time when it didn't exist. Not to mention, he was the first guy in the UFC to come in with what become known as UFC gloves.
Yes,
with MMA gloves,
the fingerless gloves. Yes.
No, the finger gloves.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Because he actually came in with those gloves. I can't remember exactly what they were in before. Shuto had been around for a while before that, so it's possible that that he got it from Shuto. I don't know where else they could have gotten them from. They had to exist if he came in wearing them. But he was the first guy to come in wearing those, and he was the first guy to come in with kind of a cross-trained background.
Fun fact, I don't know if you remember the first guy. I'm pretty sure it was the first guy he ever knocked out in the UFC. It was a guy named John Matua.
Yeah.
That guy once read my cards, sort of tarot style. Yes, it was in a parking lot of an apartment complex in Anaheim, California.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't realize it was him until afterwards. I'd never seen – I mean, at that point, I had been already introduced to UFC, but I had never seen that knockout. I watched it. Maybe hold on a second. I know who that guy is. I do remember he drove a very nice SUV that was souped up at the time, and I wonder what this gentleman does, that he made a little bit of money for himself.
Yeah, I wonder too, because he only fought like 3 or 4 matches,
and that one did not go. That one did not end well for him.
No, that did not go well. It's funny because he was advertised as as like
bone breaker.
Yeah, as being be in the Hawaiian art of bone crushing, and that he was like over 300 pounds.
Yeah, he was an intimidating looking fellow. Yeah.
Yeah, though my understanding is in reality he probably weighed about the same as Abbott. He was just bigger. Yeah. But yeah, so that was that, and then honorable mentions that I voted for that did not get in. We'll go over these one at a time. Rich Franklin.
Okay. Go. I'll give you the floor. I have plenty to say about him.
Okay, so obviously a great guy. Yeah, so obviously a great guy. He was the guy that he was the man at the time that Anderson Silva came into UFC. Anderson Silva had to beat him in order to become the champion. So and that's what set in motion that early reign. So
and he was someone who won the middleweight championship just one fight after it had been created. It was Evan Tanner who beat Dave Terrell in what was sort of the original middle when that belt was created.
What Memorial Bustamante?
So it was discontinued after he left to Pride, and then reinstated with the bout that I mentioned, the Evan Tanner and Dave Terrell bout. Evan Tanner pulled out a win, I think in the first sort of a ground and pound win against Dave Terrell, and then was placed in, I think, what was his second match against Rich Franklin.
Yeah,
the first time
lost.
They had met.
He lost when the first time at light heavyweight. Yeah, they fought light heavyweight. Both went down, and then they fought.
He did it again.
Yeah, he did it again.
Rich Franklin, what a lot of people don't remember either, is that at the time he sort of made waves in the light heavyweight division with his win against David Terrell, and I think one other win in the light heavyweight division. I can't remember. But that was sort of the first division that he fought in. At the time, they might not have even had a 185 division that they were putting fights on regularly in.
Well, that kind of reminds me how early Pride, they had the heavyweight division, they had that middleweight division. They didn't have anything else. Mm-hmm. And the best of Pride fighting championships. So back when they were still on Spike and they were starting to show the highlights of Pride. They showed a fight of Anderson Silva and Carlos Newton.
Yeah. I didn't watch that until those highlights either.
At the time, those guys were of course, Newton never fought higher than middleweight. And Silva, he's kind of a bigger guy, and I wouldn't say
he's a very tall dude, and I think he's a deceptively large dude. I think, but because of his lanky frame.
Yeah, but I think he had probably less of a filled out frame at the time because he was tall, but I don't think
he's always been slender.
Yeah, I don't think he developed more muscle at the time. So at the time, he weighed 185 without cutting weight.
Okay. Wow. Oh, wow. And that's what he would fight in as well.
And when he fought in Pride against Newton, that's what he fought at. They're both in the 180s, and the weight like I said, they didn't have their welterweight division, which is more in line with middleweight, and they didn't have their lightweight division. So they didn't have either of those divisions. So the only thing the only place that they could fight at was this lower weight, at their natural weight, at a lower weight. Mm-hmm. But that's just something to bring up. The fight didn't really have a whole lot of significance at the time.
Yeah, no. Other than Carlos Newton, Carlos Newton he got knocked out by a flying knee. So if anything, it was sort of a notable knockout for that Anderson had on his record before he was able to find success in the UFC.
I also remember Akihito Gono.
He to come out in the afro and disco glasses.
Yeah, when he there was this time that he fought. He also fought Anderson Silva in Pride. In Pride, and there was this time I remember watching this interview where Josh Barnett was thinking, "Oh, Anderson Silva's a former Shooto champion. He's gonna go in there and massacre him," and that was that flying heel hook.
No, Rio Chonin. You're right.
Yeah.
I did it last time. I got you back.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, there was that.
I mixed up Ensign Inoue with the Japanese dude that kissed Heath Herring.
I can't remember what his name was either.
Neither do I.
And you also got Mighty Mo and King Mo mixed up.
All right, go on. Anyway, so Rio Chonin.
Yeah, but he did that flying heel hook. That was back.
I heard Anderson had a broken ankle or something. I don't know. Is that BS?
I don't know, but I do know that was back before Anderson Silva was the monster that he had. He
eventually became.
Yeah, but he already had four losses on his record before he came to the UFC.
He wasn't perfect when he arrived in the UFC by any means.
No, by the time he got into the UFC, he was perfect. But before that, it took a while for him to actually develop.
But his record wasn't perfect, rather.
That's correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah, his record wasn't perfect. Before he became the greatest middleweight of all time and arguably one of the greatest fighters of all time, he was only human.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
it wasn't like Fedor, who until later
hit the ground running and just completely bulldozed and then petered off. You know?
Yeah,
I mean, Manny Pacquiao is a sort of a similar fighter in boxing in that he had about 3 or 4 losses on his record before he even won a major championship. You know, and some fighters hit
before he became that dominant.
Exactly.
Yeah, some fighters before they became dominant and the best in the world, they had to go through some more humble times. So but sort of bringing it back to Rich Franklin for just one more minute, he was a very cool fighter to watch, a dynamic striker. He has some very cool knockouts. Nate Quarry, Miltich fighter.
Miltich, I think associated, because I remember when I first started following it, he was sort of self-trained, and I think did grappling training with Miltich, but not exactly Miltich fighting systems.
Well, I remember that at the time it was a big deal when he was champion, because it was him, Hughes, Sylvia.
Yes.
All 3 of those guys were in some way or another associated with. So they owned I think they only had 4 championships at the time. They owned 4 of them. That's one of the reasons why the Miltich championship or Miltich system, even though they kind of gotten on harder times.
But you can argue. One can argue that even to this day.
Well, a Miltich product, yeah.
Robbie Lawler was a member of Miltich fighting systems at the time. It was during the same time period. You know?
And Miltich was there when Lawler won the championships, and he and Hughes. Even though they left the camp, Hughes and Lawler, they're all still close. They all got in there and they all congratulated him. They were all happy for him. Yeah. They're still definitely still significant.
So then you got 3 more.
Okay.
Honorable mentions.
4 more honorable mentions.
mentions.
Okay, the next honorable mention is Mr. Don Fry.
Mm-hmm. Don Fry won UFC 8. He won 1, didn't he?
He won 2, I think, UFC 8 and UFC 9, I'd like to say.
Okay, an American UFC icon.
He was another original cross-trained athlete, because he had the wrestling background, he had the boxing background, he also had a judo background.
Don Fry,
and he was trained by Dan Severn.
Yes, he was Dan Severn's prodigy, and Don Fry actually picked up a little bit of steam in his Pride FC years with sort of these random YouTube-style videos. Am I correct?
Yes.
Don Fry, is that right? Or what was it called?
I think so. Probably something like that.
What were you mentioning? Yes. And then there was a very popular fight against.
I forget the Japanese pro wrestler. I can't even remember.
Was it? I'm not gonna try to look for it.
Hey, go back. I think I know who it is.
He won that one.
I think it's Takayama.
Yes, Takayama?
Yeah, it's Takayama.
Okay. Yes, it is. You're right. That's correct.
Yeah, the one where they're grabbing each other, going.
And at the time, Don Fry only had.
And he had a great fight with Ken Shamrock.
Yes.
That was probably one of Shamrock's better Pride fights.
So pre sort of modern era, there was this sort of era of big, awesome sort of wrestler fighter dudes. Mark Coleman, Mark Kerr, Don Fry, Dan Severn, Ken Shamrock. These sort of
where wrestlers were dominating the early UFC.
Yes. But it was sort of this.
Yeah, early MMA, I should say.
It was neat though, in that these were all very. Nowadays, you get this mix of almost body types.
Yeah.
You get a mix of body types. You get sort of softer body, flabbier dudes sometimes that can win fights, and you get sort of these leaner dudes that can win fights. all of these guys, Don Fry, like I said, they were buff, all American looking buff.
Except for maybe Dan Severn. Severn always had
yes. He was sort of a more menacing bear, sort of giant bear style looking dude,
But yeah, there were these early wrestlers who were, put
later on, you did get some of your strikers that were a little softer, like I mentioned, like Josh Barnett, Pedro Hizo, and Pete Williams. They were sort of more normal.
Hizo?
Pedro Hizo, I think so. Don't you think?
Oh yeah, true.
I mean, compared to Mark Coleman had deltoids that came up to like his temples.
Oh, and then also Fedor.
Oh yeah, he's the perfect example of the flabby.
He's always had roles.
Heavyweight dude. Yes.
Yeah, he's always had roles. Yeah.
But Don Fry was sort of a member of these group of dudes that during that time in the late '90s looked like the toughest guys on the planet. Yeah. They looked like the scariest, toughest dudes on the planet.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, he had a classic fight against Ken Shamrock. He had a classic fight against Mark Coleman. He went into his career at Pride. With only the one loss on his record against Mark Coleman. So it's sort of also, he helped solidify Pride's reputation as, hey, this is where we're going to get some of the premier dudes in mixed martial arts right now to come and fight. And we're going to place them up against competition that's going to be worthy of sort of your entertainment.
And I noticed that probably midway through his Pride career, that's when he kind of started really having issues there.
Yes, it was. He would not lose again until a fight against Hidehiko Yoshida. Though I do believe, to be fair, this was under modified rules where Hidehiko Yoshida was allowed to wear his gi. Is that correct? Yeah. I think I remember it that way. Yeah. And so that might have factored into the fight one way or another, right?
Well, you also have to remember that Pride was very lax on their ring attire.
Yes.
They allowed Hoist to go in there wearing his gi. They allowed Yoshida to go in there.
I believe at the time UFC even had maybe not as relaxed rules, but they did have a little bit slight more variation on what people were allowed to take into the ring, wear into the ring.
Actually, I think at the time the unified rules were in play. That's early 2000.
No more shoes or boots in the ring.
Yeah, I think by the time the unified rules were in play, and they were the specific rules that you had to follow. Okay. Whereas Pride was still, and even some Japanese promotions to a degree still kind of
do that now.
Yeah, they kind of still allow latitude.
Not preferred for myself, I guess. It just seems to me like an added tool to be able to sort of use, But yeah, he did run into some issues once he was in the UFC. Got knocked out cold by Gary Goodridge. I do remember that one. Yeah. He was dead by the
Pride,
time.
You mean?
Sorry. Oh, yeah. Sorry. I apologize, Pride.
Nakao was the guy who kissed.
There we are. Yes. There you are. Yoshihiro Nakao. So yes.
I remember at the time he was seriously contemplating whether to actually continue trying to wrestle for the Japanese world team or to go professional in Pride.
Fry or Nakao? Apologies.
What?
Are you talking about Fry or are you talking about Yoshihiro Nakao?
Nakao.
Okay.
Nakao, because that was in K1 and that build up to that fight. They did stuff. Pride in on Japanese TV. They did stuff similar to like the countdowns, the countdown interviews and stuff like that. They were definitely like I think UFC. They like to build up their fighters, make them more human, and they would do interviews with Don. They would do interviews with both the fighters. They did an interview with Don Fry, and then they did an interview with Nakao, where they show him with his parents, and he's saying, "I'm considering going professional in Pride," or actually, well, and it was K1 at the time, but yeah. So that and his mother was a little distraught to a degree. I remember him thinking.
I mean, families. Different families sort of react to different things, and I think the different cultures are sort of more expressive. Yeah.
So, but yeah. So he.
Any final words about Don Fry?
Okay. Well, I'm glad that I really liked him in. Godzilla Final Wars.
I never watched that. Godzilla 2000 or what was it?
Godzilla Final Wars. It was the last Japanese made.
Godzilla.
Because you remember after the abysmal Godzilla American made Godzilla
the Matthew Broderick one.
Japan revived their their efforts to make Japanese movies.
I remember 2000. I don't remember Final War.
Final War never actually got a U.S. release.
Okay.
Which is
but I do remember the posters. Posters.
Yeah, you can find it on DVD. You can find it online, but it wasn't released.
You know what? We haven't done this yet, but I'll make sure to do this. When I post up the podcast onto the site, I'll put the poster for Final Wars underneath it, so that way anybody that wants to see it will be able to check it out. Right from the site.
But part of the reasons why Fry was cast in that is because the director looked at his how he was in
Pride.
Yeah, in Pride, and thought, I want him.
Well, yeah.
The role that he took was specifically
crafted for Don
Fry.
That's awesome.
And he went in. I like this character because he's a normally nice guy. He actually does a pretty decent acting job. He actually looks like this hard military guy because he plays this military soldier.
Yeah.
So he goes in there and he nailed.
It was all about it.
Yeah, he nailed the role. I think he did pretty well. So yeah, that's
honorable mention, Don Fry.
Yeah, honorable mention, Don Fry. Okay, next honorable mention, Matt the Terror Serra.
Yeah. Definitely a UFC veteran. Honorable mention, much appreciated.
Known for the big upset against George St. Pierre.
Yes, we spoke about that a couple weeks ago.
Which is what some people were comparing the Holly Holm.
Yeah, but not so much, right? In my opinion.
There were some people who were saying that, but I don't even think this compares because Sarah had lost, George St. Pierre and Sarah both had losses on the records.
Mm-hmm.
Neither Holm nor
Rousey
had losses.
It's not a fair comparison, and not only that, but let's say at the time GSP was the dominant fellow, and we could say that Rousey would have been the dominant analogous sort of comparison.
Well, and then on top of that,
Sarah had just come off of a reality show that he won the opportunity to get into the title fight in the first place. He was sort of he was trying to reignite a career that had that was sort of fledgling in 155 by signing up for a reality show that took place at 170.
Yeah.
If you see Matt Serra, awesome dude, excellent dude. Sort of a shorter dude for the weight division, a shorter guy for welterweight.
That's why I went down to lightweight.
So one could say that it was a hazard for him to move up to 170 and give it a shot, but he won the tournament. His technique that season was really just a grappling technique. He didn't really, I don't remember, have a lot of crazy knockouts throughout that season, and he definitely shocked the world that day when he defeated George St. Pierre for the welterweight title.
Well, I hate to not to take too much away from him, but there were a lot of people saying that his win against St. Pierre was a fluke, and you could maybe make that argument. But when they were comparing to Holly Holm, Ronda Rousey, the comparison there is arguably the Sarah GSP one was a fluke, but that was. Holm Rousey was not a fluke.
I don't.
Holm Rousey.
So at all.
Holm Rousey was a one-sided
route of Rousey. I mean, it was a perfectly executed game plan by somebody who had the techniques to pull it off.
Yeah, it was a one-sided spanking. That's what it was. She just went in there and handed her rear end to her.
Agreed.
Okay, so
next one.
Okay, so the next one is Megumi Fuji. Next honorable mention.
Megumi Fuji.
Yes.
Break it down for us.
Okay, so Miss Fuji was a very early pioneer of women's MMA, along with the likes of Marlos Conan and people like that. And but she didn't get much stateside exposure until that strawweight tournament with Bellator, when they were trying but failed very miserably to promote women's MMA.
Okay.
And she got upset in the finals. Oh, of note. She beat Carla Esparza and Jessica Aguilar.
Okay, so she has wins. She has wins over two UFC fighters.
In order to face Zola Frosto in the finals of that tournament, she was upset.
Yeah.
Against a woman who was not only an underdog, but Frosto was having to cut major weight in order to get to strawweight. She couldn't even train properly because it was that tournament format, and she was having to make weight every so often. She couldn't eat on a regular basis. She couldn't train properly. There was actually one point where she sat at a weigh and she was considering cutting her hair because she had long hair. She said she was straight up considering cutting her hair in order
to get that edge.
Yeah, in order to make the weight. But and I don't doubt she would have. She didn't have to. But
honorable mention, and I think rightfully so. You know what I mean?
And Fuji, she was undefeated up until that point. She'd been undefeated for a long time, and she was also a small protege of Josh Barnett.
Okay.
Of that,
the babyface assassin.
Of that catch wrestling background. But anyways,
Pancration.
Yeah, she's one of those veterans that I don't think gets enough credit. Hopefully, she does get, and I have no doubt she'll get in at some point. But okay, and then the last of the honorable mentions, and then we will finally get to the news. We'll finally get to the
last
news.
of the honorable mention. But what I think we will do today, Matt, is I think we'll skip the news and we'll move right on to your.
How about we mention the news in passing, kind of like we did last time, and then we'll
definitely.
We'll browse over it, and then we'll go, and then
we'll break down the weekend's fight night very quickly.
Well, there's some other developments that like I said, we can just browse over.
All right.
Okay, so the final one is the final inductee the final honorable mention is Jeff Blatnick.
All righty, break it down for us.
Okay, Jeff Blatnick, he was involved in the early UFC, involved in rules. He was actually he was the commissioner at the time, back when there was a position for a commissioner. Nowadays, that position would probably be filled more with Dana White being the president. I think the commissioner position was try to make it look more like an actual sports league, whereas nowadays Dana White, it's a company.
Yes,
he's making it sound like a sports league, but it's a promotional company, what it is.
It's a fight promotion company.
Yeah. Whereas Blatnick, he was in that position. He was appointed to that position. He was responsible. Was
this during the Cephomore Entertainment Group? Is that what
this was during the Cephomore Entertainment Group era, and he would actually, after the Zuffa buyout, he would actually be involved a lot as a judge. I remember hearing him on who knows how many fights. Jeff Blatnick was listed as one of the judges, and he was one of the better judges. He'd been around the sport. His involvement in regulation of the sport is almost comparable to like John McCarthy or Herb Dean's, because he was more in probably the background, than those guys. They were in the octagon or the cage. He was outside. Yeah. He was outside. He was doing the judging. He was
one of the behind the scenes figures that was influential, just like anyone else.
Yes, and so he's of note. He died a few years back.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, he died a few years back. I think it was from cancer. But he also got a UFC. He was inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame this last year. Because the UFC did modifications to their rules, so he's under the influential wing or something like that. Okay. So there's a pioneer wing, there's a fight wing, there's just a modern fighter induction, and then there's a influential wing. He was the first of the influential wing. Boss Rutan was the pioneer wing. BJ Penn was the fighter wing, and the first induction of the fight wing was Hughes Trigg too. But Blatnick, his widow was there to receive the honor, or on the posthumous honor.
Behalf,
It's nice to see that he was on. It's nice to see. Yeah. It was nice to see he was recognized as someone who was pivotal in turning UFC into the sport that is today.
Absolutely.
Okay, so
going over some news now.
Okay, very briefly, we're going to go over the news of the weekend some recent news. So this last weekend we had the UFC Fight Night, Henderson versus Masvidal in Seoul, South Korea. This was the UFC debut in South Korea. It was on UFC Fight Pass. Main event was Benson Henderson versus Jorge Masvidal, and it was a split decision. Henderson won it.
Yeah. Henderson won at 170, a welterweight fight against Jorge Masvidal. He was able to outpoint the man, and what was his last fight in the on his UFC contract?
It's the last fight in the UFC contract, which rolls into this other piece of news.
We'll go ahead and roll right into it.
And that Henderson's considering looking at the free agent market.
Scott Coker has gone so far as to say that he's expressing interest in him on behalf of Strikeforce.
What
am I thinking of right now?
You're thinking of Bellator. On the behalf of Bellator. There's also a Korean promotion called Road FC that's interested in signing him for not a small sum. They said $200,000.
Okay, you mentioned earlier it was a six-figure, that Gil Melendez was able to sort of pump out a six-figure signing bonus the last time he sort of renegotiated with the UFC. We'll see if Ben Henderson is able to sort of push the numbers up the same way.
Yeah, and another other note is that Bellator's on a roll in terms of they're getting their recent signings, and they're being able to get UFC fighters and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the question here is if they could actually get away with this would be huge. And also, him coming in on a win, they could arguably throw him in a title shot right off the bat. So there's
some possibilities for him and also for fight fans to be able to see something a little bit different, something a little bit new. I don't know if that would be preferable. I think, fight fans might want to see him stick around the UFC, see what he can make happen. Probably at 155, you and I were talking about, maybe not at 170. I just don't. Maybe he can sort of develop a dynamic enough skill set at welterweight to be able to maybe put something together where he can finally face off against Robbie Lawler, champ.
I don't think he.
But he has expressed interest in going back down to 155. Is that right?
Yes, he has expressed interest.
I mean, and there's still plenty. People would like to see him matched up against whoever. At this point, it is sort of this revolving chair where these dudes are fighting each other over and over again. But they're still young and they still fight very well.
Yep.
We're still willing to watch them fight.
Okay, so then other snippets of news, and then we'll get to the actual Hall of Fame induction.
Yes, indeed.
So there's talks that one of the fights that they're considering signing for Bellator. One of the fights they're considering doing for the Risen Fight Federation New Year's Eve event.
The Risen Fight Federation New Year's Eve event being of note because that is where Fedor Emelianenko is
supposedly going to make his debut.
Is expected to make his return.
Haven't gotten anything.
Nothing concrete yet.
Yeah, nothing concrete yet. We do know that they're going to have that freak show fight between Shinya Aoki and Sakuraba.
Yeah, that's a weird one for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Sakuraba definitely about 2 decades past his prime.
Yeah, and
Aoki about a decade past his.
Well, we'll see how that fight goes. But anyways, the next fight that they're considering, that they're trying to see if they can't do it, is Bob Sapp versus Akebono under MMA rules.
So we've gone into a time machine and traveled back to 2006.
Yeah, actually no, it's probably more like 2002, 2003. It was funny because I watched, like I said, I was in Japan. My family were at our grandparents' apartment. We're all in the living room watching this thing.
What prefecture were you in?
We were in Kanagawa Prefecture.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so we were.
Shout out to Kanagawa.
Yep.
Go on.
Yeah, which my brother is back there. Again.
Shout out to John. Thank you again for that Rousey piece.
Yes, shout out to @BloodPact.
Yes,
@725.
Yes, @BloodPact725. John Japan on Twitter.
Who is who's gaining some. Who's looking to interview some Japanese MMA fighters as our Japanese MMA correspondent, and he's also seeing if he can't cover the Risen event.
All right, absolutely.
At the Saitama Super Arena.
We would not hate that.
So yeah, we were watching that fight on TV live as it happened, and they just I don't know if you know, but Bob Sapp would go into. It was being hailed as Japan versus U.S. because Akebono Taro, born Chad Rowan, is he's a naturalized Japanese citizen. He had to do that in order to go into the sumo because he was a sumo yokozuna.
Mhm.
So but he's actually natural born
Hawaii.
Yeah, Hawaiian.
Got it.
Yeah, natural born Hawaiian. So he was being touted as U.S. versus Japan because he'd taken the effort to learn the language. He was very respectful and stuff like that. And though when he retired from sumo, he dyed his hair, got tattoos. It was like
Finally, I can be myself.
Yeah, he basically started doing stuff that he wasn't able to do, and it's funny, but it's fun because he actually lost weight when he started going into.
You would hope. My good. I mean, you gain that sort of weight to perform well in sumo, and it's all part of the culture. But I don't know that staying like that for very long is the healthiest idea.
Yeah,
and so you know.
Yeah, so
By the way, Akebono,
let's be honest.
His nickname, to say the nickname.
Makebono?
No. I don't know what that one is. What does that mean?
It's
What does it mean?
Maketa is the Japanese word for he lost. So Makebono was became a Japanese media name for him because he was known for going out there and losing basically.
So then, have you heard of the Western nickname for him?
What was his Western nickname?
Akebozo. So the guy is, he's popular for maybe his losses more than his wins. And Japan they're into these sorts of fights.
They're into freak show fights. Let's be honest, they're into freak show. But
casual US MMA fight fans might not know that Japanese MMA culture is just slightly because it's been diminished over the years.
Yes.
Right? In the mid 2000s was when you sort of started seeing the last of that stuff, but commonly
I'd argue into the late 2000s. We were seeing freak show fights into the late 2000s.
Oh yeah, you saw the Hongman Choi Fedor fight. That's one example of something that I considered a freak show fight. I mean, Fedor being involved.
There was also the Dream Super Hulk tournament where you had Jose Canseco going against Hongman Choi and Bob Sapp going against Musashi and Sokoju.
Yeah, so they like these sorts of things, and I mean, Bob Sapp might. Oh, you got any predictions for the Akebono Bob Sapp fight?
Well, actually, I'm not sure if this is confirmed. There's rumors that this is going around.
Got it. Yeah, no. I mean, what can?
I don't know because Sapp became more known for his losses than his wins towards the end of his career, and later on as well. So
I mean, but this is the same fight promotion that's willing to put on an Aoki Sakuraba fight. So it's what's unfortunate about the
and was willing to match up Fedor against a long-time nemesis who's way past his prime.
What's unfortunate
was also willing to match him up against a kickboxer with one MMA match.
What's unfortunate about an MMA fight organization from Japan sort of rather any given one.
Well, and then you also look at some of his fights in Pride. Hunt.
Yeah.
The butt bomb.
Yeah.
And then also Zuluzinho, yeah. Zuluzinho.
Yeah.
That fight lasted what?
That was an incredible fight. Incredible fight to watch. I mean, ridiculous, but incredible. Just seeing Zuluzinho matched up against Fedor. But the point I was going to make is for MMA fans though that do have memories of mixed martial arts events happening in Japan that were meaningful, with bouts that were.
Another example of a freak show fight, kind of in the later part of the 2000s, was Sapp versus Kinnikuman. Basically a Japanese pro wrestler who was
Ultimate Muscle.
Yeah,
the cartoon Ultimate Muscle sort of character. I was going to mention though, Japan once upon a time did put on respectable MMA fight cards. Sure, every now and then they had freak shows peppered in, but for the most part, you got to see some really cool, dynamic MMA fights with some of the best fighters in the world. And that is not the case as much anymore. And so it is sort of, there is a melancholy feeling to these sort of sad events that they put on year after year at this point. It's like not a year or 2 year passes where Japan tries to sort of reignite that year-end mixed martial arts sort of pageantry. But really those shows are duds.
Well, honestly, those year-end events have actually happened every single year.
In some form, right?
From that original
Pride to Dream to what one or
no, the one in recent years has been Inoki Bombaye, which was actually a revival of the early Inoki Bombaye fights in the early 2000s, where you had like Krokop matched up against Fujita and stuff like that. But it's been consistent. It's been going on from it's been going on from that original Dynamite. From the original Inoki Bombaye until this year. There's always been a Japanese New Year's Eve show.
Yes,
always.
but with diminishing interest and talent.
True, because you've had some of the better talent being signed on to the UFC, and some guys retiring. But yeah, it's still tradition.
Yeah,
it's still tradition because that's the the holiday season. What we would consider the bigger holiday is Christmas, and holiday season in Japan, because they do celebrate Christmas more because they've adapted some Western adapted Western cultural traditions.
Norms, yeah.
Their big one has always been New Year's.
Yeah.
Always. That's why you had these New Year's shows. They like to do stuff before
to cap off it.
Yeah, the cap off the year. Go out of the year with a bang. That's the Japanese style. That's why they like to do this. So,
and I don't know. So finishing up this, I was wondering, and it's up to you because we're sort of on limited time. Do you want to? We still have 2 more weeks before the end of the year. We could save the Hall of Fame list for 1 more week. What do you think? We could start next week and immediately go into the Hall of Fame. What do you say?
Okay, I guess we could do that to save time.
Because we did, to be fair, we were very thorough about the honorable mentions.
Yeah, we were pretty thorough on the honorable mentions. So yeah, I was planning on actually doing the top 10 article this week, but I guess we can. I can. I haven't done the top 10 fights of November, so I guess I could.
We could do them both. And I feel like like I said, we went over some stuff. So I don't know. I'm kind of ready to wrap it up if you are.
Okay, yeah. Okay. So yeah. Well, yeah. Next week is gonna be the Hall of Fame.
Yes, it is.
The actual inductees.
Next week will be there will only be 3 more weeks after. We might not see you all the week of Christmas because it's Christmas. Either we'll do a late one, or rather an early one that week, or a late one that week. But definitely next week on Thursday.
And also next week we should probably do. Next week is gonna be that 3-day streak where the UFC is doing 3 different fights.
Is it starting the day that we do the podcast?
Yeah. So we can basically do a pre-show of
all of
that
those things
first
of
fight
that weekend.
night. That first fight night. It's gonna be it's gonna be a major event. So yeah, there's gonna be a fight night the day that we do the
podcast itself.
The podcast itself. Then there's gonna be the Ultimate Fire finale the week after.
The Friday after.
The Friday after, and then the Saturday after.
That's
it's
the big
UFC
one,
194.
Oh, I can't wait for that one. I cannot wait for that one.
McGregor versus Aldo.
Aldo.
Do not get injured, Aldo.
Vitamin Rockhold as well.
Yeah, right. Yeah, do not get injured, Aldo. Please do not get injured.
Nobody get injured, because that fight card is going to be amazing. Hopefully, that's an awesome card to sort of end the year on. Yeah, I think so. It's got two title bouts on there, a lightweight bout and a middleweight.
Oh, and that's nice because then the day after New Year's, we get to see a UFC card as well.
You and I have complained about the oversaturation, but I think in this case, this month it'll be okay.
Yeah, there's certain months where it's better to just have a lower frequency of MMA fights. Like I said, September, October they cut back a little bit.
Yeah.
This month, let's go out with a bang,
like you were saying.
And then the weekend before Christmas, that's the UFC on Fox fight card.
Yeah. Who's headlining that bad boy?
That's good. That's the lightweight bout. That's Rafael Dos Anjos versus Donald Cerrone.
The cowboy stuff. So
the cowboy.
So we'll see you all next week. Shout out to Heffy Jr. at Heffy Jr. On the Twitter, Tom Heffernan.
And to my dear brother John Salzer at BloodPack725.
Shout out to Ted Check at Ted Check. That's CZECH on the last name. At MMA Freakout is the website's Twitter handle.
At Matthew Salzer.
I am at Edson_V at my Twitter handle.
And also again, we are on News Hub. We're going to articles will be republished, and I'll also be redoing the podcast as well. So
yes, something I was speaking to Matt this week about is at the beginning of next year we're going to have just a few format changes. We might not be streaming live as regularly. We might be recording some of the podcasts.
We'll probably be doing some live streams. It's just gonna be
a mix, and also we're gonna start to experiment with different sorts of shows, let's say, on the website itself. So sort of please keep up and keep on subscribing. We've had a few.
I've gotten a resurgence. A surgence in Twitter followers as of late.
Yes.
I'd like again. Thank you for all the Twitter followers. It's an honor to have over 1,000. I really never thought I'd get that far, but yeah. Redirect to this guy as well, please.
I'm not so bad.
Yeah.
So I'm ready to get out of here if you are.
Yep. Okay. Well, thanks. So next week, Hall of Fame.
Next week.